Thank you very much for staying with us. So there are concerns of emerging pollutants threatening the well-being of a fish species in Cape Town. Antibiotics and pharmaceuticals end up in water due to widespread use of unregulated disposals. Now, Professor Priscilla Baker from the University of the Western Cape joins us now to explore this a bit more. Professor, very good evening to you. Thank you very much for your time. Talk us through about what some of these pollutants are that are threatening fish in Cape Town.
Good evening, and thank you for the opportunity to comment on this very topical issue. I think it is important for us to understand that these chemicals or emerging contaminants, as we call them, have been around and have been in use for a very long time. So these are not new chemicals. However, we are now being able to detect them at very low concentrations in our natural environment due to more sophisticated methods of measurement, and I think due to increased awareness of how these chemicals interact with our environment. We come to this knowledge because we see the manifestation in natural. So fish species that are disappearing or that are mutating in different ways, bacteria that we have become resistant to. So when it starts to impact on our everyday living in a very real and tangible way, then we start to become concerned. However, these chemicals have been around for a very long time. And we believe that it's our responsibility to report in an informed way on the rising levels of contaminants and exactly how they impact on our environment and how this threat is coming to realization now.
You're saying this is not new, Professor. Talk to us a bit about, how dangerous this is, especially for the fish species in Cape Town. And, what immediate threat is there as a result of what you've just alluded to?
Okay. So these compounds, let's call them by names that we can identify. These are personal care compounds, so things that we find in our cosmetics, our disinfectants that we use in our home, the chlorine that we use to disinfect our swimming pools and other things. When these chemical compounds, who have very good uses for mankind, ends up in a bigger chemical environment, they undergo secondary reaction that produce other compounds as a natural reactive pathway. And those compounds then begin to pose a threat within that natural environment. Specifically relating to fish and the impact that is currently under the microscope, if I may use this analogy, is the fact that these smaller body mass organisms manifest changes quicker. When we go to doctors, the medicines that are prescribed to us are based on our body weight, the amount that's necessary to bring about the necessary effect. So when we look at those organisms, smaller body, quicker accumulation of these compounds, and so we pick it up and we see the effect there. Of course, intended or implied threat, I should say, to humans, is that we eat these animals and we draw on these ecosystems, and eventually it ends up in our body. The particular care, I think, was a few years ago and still very prevalent in around antibiotics and how we develop resistance to antibiotics. Now, these antibiotics, we just dispose of them. We don't finish our course of antibiotics prescribed by our doctors. And in many others, these antibiotics end up in the water. And these microbes are not enough to evolve and to develop mechanisms to cope with those chemicals simply because they are in the environment at a level that they can relate to. So they change their mode of action. And when we are infected by these bacteria, the same medications are no longer effective because the bacteria have evolved or they have changed their mechanism. And so those same chemical compounds, those same antibiotics are no longer effective. So you see, it's not a simple cause and effect. It develops over time. It's a cumulative effect. And it's not that we're now doing something wrong necessarily. But I think it's the case, in my personal view, that we should wake up to this threat and start caring our systems that are in place, our water treatment systems, our methods of detection, how we as individuals use and dispose of these chemicals play a big role in what happens in our environment. So it's a way.
Professor, we've long had a conversation about the threats to the ocean economy. And why are we still having this conversation? You've just spoken about how we need to take responsibility for how we dispose of some of these. But how and when would we actually see some kind of accountability when it comes to threats like this to the ocean economy? This is not the first. I understand there'd been a conference that was also held in Cape Town recently, which had dissected the very same conversation. Conversations time and time again are being held about this, but there doesn't seem to be much of a shift about the way that things are being done with regard to, in this instance, the pollution and the threat to the ocean economy.
Yes, thank you for that comment. I believe that it is important to have those conversations, and the fact that conversations are being had should not be seen as an impassive response. I think that technology has advanced. Our understanding of the environment and how we interact with the environment has changed. The level of knowledge and information available to the general public has changed over time. And I believe it is imperative for us to review policies and systems that have been in place since time immemorial in the light of this new knowledge. And there are a lot of things and movements and discussion panels and forums, I don't want to mention any one in particular, that is looking at this very, very pertinent issue. So, for instance, in South Africa, we have the South African National Standards 241, which was accepted in 2015, the latest revised version, which forms the basis of our Water Act and our Foods and Cosmetic Act, etc. Those guidelines are not specifically tailored to South African conditions, incidents of outbreak, for instance, that have been monitored and include those guidelines. Those guidelines are adapted from the World Health Organization guidelines, the Environmental Protection Agency guidelines, and this is not unique to South Africa. Many countries, first countries around the world, recognize those governing bodies as the authority on what's safe and what's not. So, I suppose in sense of what we are doing as a government, as research infrastructure in the country, is to say that we're not neglecting our duty to gather information and to share that knowledge, pointing to the conference we have, but that there is more to it than that, and that we should now start saying that just adopting blanket guidelines is maybe not, but in specific instances, so let's say the Western Cape, we should be working closely with our local municipality, and we have initiated that as a university to try and influence the decision makers, the policy makers, because that's where the budget is from.
Prof, before we run out of time, obviously education around the occurrence of emerging pollutants is crucial, and obviously the use of natural resources efficiently should also be a priority. We're running out of time. How crucial is that?
Okay, so just very quickly, you alluded to the conference. The Electrochemistry Society in South Africa has a history of 15 years as an established organization, hosting these kinds of platforms to share knowledge around energy sources, the problem identification, new methodologies, new materials, new ways of doing things. And we use these platforms for our students to showcase the knowledge that they are generating from universities around the country. And we create an opportunity for them to interact with international experts in the area so that we drive the momentum of the conversation. But I think crucially for us, we welcome the opportunity to work with our local municipalities, not just in the Western Cape. I think I speak on behalf of academics in South Africa. We want to have an impact, that relationship with the service providers so that we can better understand their limitations and see how our knowledge and the investment, that government has made in our training because of use and of benefit to the greater South Africa.
All right, I'm afraid that's all we have time for tonight. Thank you very much for your time, certainly joining us via Skype there. Professor Priscilla Baker from the University of the Western Cape, talking to us about some concerns of emerging pollutants threatening the well-being of the fish species in the Cape Town area. Let's take a short break here on The Full View.